Hello and welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I am your host, Trent Clark, CEO of Leadershipity, serial entrepreneur, international speaker, and now author of Leading Winning Teams. Excited for another great show. And I've got my good friend, Mark Battiato. Mark, how are you doing?
There
My
you
good
go, buddy.
Italian brother.
Just listening to your music, it's got me pumped up. I'm ready to go take a bike ride or something.
Well, I feel like that's what I'm here to do, Mark. I got to tell you that thrilled to have you today because listen, when you get a guy on who's got the gig, right?
The
Uh,
gig.
Growth Institute, right? Like it's incredible. Tell us about your company real quick.
TheGreatnessInstitute.com. Growth into greatness.
Growth into greatness. That's the
And
gig right there.
that came
Growth
from
into greatness is the
growth
gig.
into greatness. That came from Bill Bailey, who had 13 kids, grew up in Kentucky. Horatio Alger Award recipient, actually. He built a $70 million company back in the 70s with no internet. And he won the Horatio Alger Award. A lot of people don't even know what that is. Where every year they honor 3 or 4 people that have gone from rags to riches, but they've given back. And he was big in the orphanages, and he was on the stage with Russ Perot and Ray Kroc and him. Everybody knew Ray Kroc, McDonald's, Russ Perot, and
Yeah.
William E. Bailey was like, "Who's this guy? Well, farm guy." But he
Yeah.
built a $70 million soap company that he built a biodegradable soap that went multi-level marketing. Amway was back then, and
Yeah.
Avon, I think, and him. And then he had the planes, he had everything. And I met him at a Jim Rohn lecture in Chicago with my brother-in-law, 2-day event. Jim Rohn, Bill Bailey was in the audience, and then Jim Rohn always talked about his mentor, Earl Schoaf. And then out of the blue, Jim Rohn goes, "Hey, I'm really blessed today. In the audience is my mentor, Bill Bailey." And everybody, my brother, like, "Bill Bailey? Who's Bill Bailey?" And he goes, "Yeah, Bill Bailey, stand up." He stands up, and everybody's like, "Who the heck is this guy?" So the whole 2 days, everybody's swarming this guy, Bill Bailey. My brother-in-law, "Let's go meet Bill Bailey." I'm like, "No, he's surrounded by people." And then the last day, the last couple hours, I'm in the restroom. He comes in. He's right next to the stall with me. I look up. He's a tall guy. I go, "Oh, you're Bill Bailey." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I'd shake your hand right now, but I don't think it's the right time." He goes, "Meet me outside." So I meet him outside, and he introduced me. He goes, "Hey, where are you from?" I go, "Arizona." I lived in Arizona at that time. And he's like, "Oh, man, I love Arizona. Jim Rohn's got a place out there. I love golfing." He goes, "Hey, you mind if I give you a call and, I can come out and play? We can come out and play golf." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, I thought, sure. Yeah, right. He gets my number. He calls me like a week later. "Hey, I'm going to come out to Arizona 3 weeks. Can I stay with you?" And I'm like, I tell my wife, she's like, "This guy, Bill Bailey's going to stay with us for 5 days." Like, "Who is that?" I'm like, "Jim Rohn's mentor." And so he actually comes out and stays at our house and play golf with him. And I remember I don't know, third or fourth day, he says, "Hey, Mark, can I talk to you in your office?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, because my kids were like 5 and 3, Brandon and Sophia. And he goes, "Hey, man," he goes, "you're effing up your life, Mark." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you're traveling around every week, going visiting these dentists all over the place." He goes, "You're gone all the time." He said, "Brandon, Sophia, he goes, "How old's Brandon?" I said, 5.5. He goes, "Hey, man, you got 10 summers left with Brandon." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, 10 summers, not 10 years." He goes, "Look, don't do what I did. I have 3 kids. They don't even know me. They're all older. I traveled around. I built a $70 million company. I had planes, yachts, boats." He goes, "I'd take everything back if I had a relationship with my kids now." And he goes, "You're
Mm.
going down the same path, Mark." And he goes, "You better," and I never heard 10 summers before. And he goes, "You better do this." He goes, "Every year, you better take 1 week with Brandon, you and him, father, son, 1 week with your daughter, 1 week with your wife, and 1 week as a family, 4 weeks. And if you don't do that, you're blowing it." And he goes, "And that's just the start." And so I was like, holy crap. So I tried to do that, and I did start doing that with my kids one on one. And it was an amazing thing to just do father, daughter, father,
Yeah.
son. And then as they started getting older, like they were like, Dad, can we just do 3 or 4 days together, not a whole week? But if I went to Maui, then it'd be, oh no, I'll go like 2 weeks for you, Dad,
Yeah.
if you go.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of clients in Hawaii, so they're like, no, I'll stay with you longer if you go to Maui, But that was one of the things that Bill Bailey taught me was the 10 summers. And I tell that to so many people now, like, hey man, you don't have 10 years, you have 10 summers, and they go like that.
Oh man, right? Yeah, having both of us having kids that are grown now, right? It just went so fast, and
Yep.
I still have the trailer. I still have a guy who's 12, and so he's still growing, and it's so fun. And our bucket list, his pre college is to see every ballpark
Oh,
before
nice.
he heads off to college. So Dad and I got to
Yeah,
go visit. You know, ballparks each summer for a week, and so we
very
try to hit
cool. Yeah,
the
very
areas,
cool.
and so
Yeah,
that's our week and time, and so it's fun. And coaching little league, it's a
yep.
ball. But yeah, I think there's something to that, right? I mean, from a guy who's been on the circuit and spoke in 17 countries and everything else,
Yep.
it's wear on you, and you spend 13 years in professional baseball. That's not a light travel schedule either, right? And so it's
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, and I think,
challenge.
yeah, when the lecture circuit, with Jim Rohn, lecturing all over, and Bill. Bill didn't lecture that much, but he was very inspirational. And my father-in-law lectured. He was a dentist for 8 years, and I traveled with him to all these dental meetings and lecturing. He was lecturing. I'm thinking, okay, I want to be a speaker, and I do speak now. But after a while, I was just like seeing all these guys fall on the lecture circuit. Jim Rohn talked about it, and Bill, and all the ego stuff. And then you're hot for a while, then you're nothing, and it's like all these guys fall on to the temptations out there on the lecture circuit because of your speaking. And it's all these, oh, you're so great, you're awesome, you're amazing. And most of the
Yep.
people that speak, when they talk about a topic, I'm just saying this from my experiences, the topic they talk about is the one they struggle with the most. But they write about it because they lived it, and they can talk about it because they're struggling. The bigger the shadow, the bigger the light, the bigger the shadow. My
Yeah.
my brother-in-law told me that one time. Like, wow, that's powerful. The bigger the
Yeah.
light, the bigger the shadow. And it's like, hey, you just got to be careful. You have to have a grounding, and that's what happened to me when I got out of college. I started a company, and it didn't make it, and I owed everybody. Like back then, 25, I owed like 70 grand, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The only way I could sleep was I put the Bible next to me, and I wasn't reading it back then. I was like 26, and I just put my hand on the Bible. I said, Lord God, just let me get a couple hours of sleep. And because I owed everybody, the phones were calling, bill collectors, and I owed my parents 25,000 out of that 70. And I remember, that time was just, I went into depression, and I remember my dad. My dad passed away 5 years ago, and my dad, I asked him in the beginning of all this, he was a CPA in Chicago, and I asked him, could you help me file chapter 7, 11, 13? I knew the numbers, but I didn't know what they meant. And my dad he didn't yell or scream. I found out later why growing up, I never heard my dad yell. Like an Italian father never yell. That's weird. And
Yeah. Nice.
I found out 25, at 25, he said, my father yelled and screamed all my childhood, and I made a commitment that I wasn't going to be like him. And by God, he made that. And he needed to yell at me a few times and scream because
Yeah.
but I remember going through this depression, and I owed him 20, and he said, Mark, I'm not going to help you file those. I can do it, but that's going to ruin your credit score and everything. You need to pay back everybody that you borrowed money from and owe, and you need to pay back your mom and I the 25,000. He didn't say it mean. He just said you just need to. And I remember like, oh man, I said, please, and he said, no, I can't do it. So it took me like 5 years to pay it all back. I got a job at 3M. Luckily that helped. But one day my dad sent me this poem in the mail called Risk It, because he knew I wasn't stepping out anymore. I lost my enthusiasm and everything. And And I've carried this poem. There's a picture of my dad right there, but I've carried this with in my wallet for like 30 something years. And the poem is called Risk It. It says, "The laugh is to risk appearing the fool. To weep is to appear sentimental. To reach out to another is to risk involvement. To express feelings is to risk exposing your true self. To place your ideas, your dreams before the crowd is to risk their loss. To love is to risk not being loved in return. To live is to risk dying. To hope is to risk despair. To try is to risk failure." And then it ends by saying, "But risk must be taken, because the greatest hazard in life is to risk nothing. The person who risks nothing, does nothing, has nothing, and is nothing. He may avoid suffering and sorrow, but he simply cannot learn, feel, change, grow, love, live. Only a person whose risk is free."
Mm,
And I remember opening that envelope and reading that, and my dad never talked about it. But I knew I just had to start risking again and
yeah.
stepping out, because owing all this money and having the guilt and shame of, because I was like about a week from calling my dad saying I got to move back to Chicago and live with you guys in the basement or something, like Joe Biden. No, only kidding, but just live in the basement. And now, now today it's like 50% of kids live with their parents. But back then, for me, it was like, if I move back to Chicago, that is like that's the worst thing ever, to move back with my parents.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, God, that was kind of the journey back to, my faith, and kind of, because you get to that point where you owe everybody, and it's like the only thing is like, God, I need. And I remember I sent my resume to 3M, and I didn't hear anything for a year, and I was about to go back to Chicago, literally 2 weeks. I got a call from 3M out of the blue. "Hey, can you come in for an interview in our Phoenix branch?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, you sent your resume a year ago." And I remember getting off the phone, and I just started crying. I said, "God," I said, I'm a wreck, man. I can't even do this interview. That was the first time I actually prayed. I said, "You need to help me on this interview." And I remember going on the first interview, got through it. Second interview, district manager came in from Chicago, and that was kind of a connection. But then he looked at my resume and he goes, "You had like 7 jobs in like 3 years." And he goes, "You're all over the map." He goes, "3M," he said, "Why would we invest in you? Because we're going to spend a lot of money training you, and you're going to leave." And I'm like, I actually said it like, "How am I going to answer this guy?" And the next thing out of my mouth was like, it wasn't from me, because I never would have thought of this. I said, "Oh, well, hey, Gene, that's a great question. That's actually to me, that's a great thing that I've had 7 jobs, because I can talk and relate to anybody. I've been in 7 different fields. I can connect with anybody." And he looks at me and he goes, "Huh, that's a that's an interesting answer." And so I go home, don't hear anything for like, there's 80 people interviewing for one job. And 2 weeks later, I get a call, "Hey, you got the job." And I'm like, that wasn't me, man. That God opened that door. And
Yeah.
that door saved me, because I got a company car, was able to pay back all my debts. And, that was kind of and then I started listening to Chuck Swindoll every day. I grew up Catholic, and started listening to Chuck Swindoll on the radio, every day for a year. And then I realized, hey, man, I, I believe in God, but I really never accepted him into my heart. And Chuck Swindoll was the one that brought me to the Lord, actually, on the
Yeah.
radio. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I see a lot of people that, you know, love religion, committed to religion, not often committed to the relationship, right? Like,
yeah,
and
exactly.
that's the challenge. I mean, this is a pretty big thing for people, and I love that, you go through these things, and unfortunately, it feels like, man, just that peace of mind can only be found, and it's almost instinctive, right? It's already there in our hearts, that it's natural to, in the worst of times, like, we go to God. I mean, we watched
Yep,
all our churches fill up in 2001, right? We
yep,
have a terrorist attack. Like, hey, listen,
yep,
we all know what we need to do. I'm getting back to church. I'm getting back to God. And it's like, wow, like,
yeah,
um,
exactly.
kind
Yeah,
of, and it kind of reminds me of the old thing. You probably remember this. the old shows Scared Straight, and they
Yeah.
take people into the prisoners and be like, hey, you want to know what it's like in here? You'd be
Yeah.
like, I don't think I
Yeah. I
want to commit
remember. Yeah.
crime anymore. It's like,
But
wait, like,
yeah, when
yeah,
we lived in Oregon, we went to this place called the Applegate Christian Fellowship, and they had this whole outdoor amphitheater where they actually baptized people every Sunday.
yeah,
I'd never seen anything like that. And I remember the pastor time said, when you're crying, God's smiling, and
mm,
when you're smiling, God's crying because He sees everything ahead. When you're like me, when I was in despair, He's like, God's smiling because He's like, hey man, I'm putting you through all this to strengthen you, not to
yeah,
hurt you and grow
David,
you. So you can show compassion on other people, and so it's all part of the process. And
yeah.
yeah,
Well, let's you got this. You start out. You are. Your father-in-law owns this school of
yeah, the
dentistry
big,
or
yeah,
the Center for Professional Development, right? And you
yes,
start this school for dentists on how to run their businesses better.
right, right,
Christy, your longtime wife, I mean, she's just known this gig from the beginning because her dad was so involved in this too, as also a
yeah,
physician himself. And then tell me, like, as you're transitioning and you're going to start working with your father-in-law, tell me, like,
yeah,
he's like, okay, hey, guess what? Now you're ready to come back and risk all this out, right? Like, let's do
yeah,
this thing. And here's the 3 books you have to read, right? And
yeah.
so walk me through that kind of conversation.
Well, it's kind of funny because before the this call, just to be truthful, my desk looks out a window, but then the picture looks all glary. So then I turn it around. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I'll show all my books. But I didn't read in college. I was a C student, and the only quote that got me by with that was Harry Truman. President Truman once said, "The C students run the world, and the A's and B's work for the C's." I'm like, I love that quote, man. But if you talk to a teacher or professors
Yeah,
or doctors, they're like, they don't like that quote.
yeah,
And
they don't like that. Yeah,
so all these books are really because I would say from my father-in-law, he's the one that got me started reading because when I started working at the business school, I worked at 3M for 5 years. Then they hired me, and then the first 3 books were the E Myth by Michael Gerber. The E stands for entrepreneurial myth. Most people start a business are not entrepreneurs or technicians who have an entrepreneurial seizure. Then the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey, and all your people listening probably know all these books. And then The Richest Man in Babylon by Clausen. You
yeah,
know,
great
so
book.
so I told you the story earlier about so the first week I'm there, he throws all these books on my desk, and he goes, "Hey, Mark, you need to read all these books. They're part of our curriculum, and the dentists need to read them, and you need to read these books, start to get an understanding of your business and our business and why your business failed." Said start with the E Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. So about a week later, he comes into my cubicle and he goes, "Hey, how'd you like that E Myth by Gerber? What'd you think of that book?" And I'm like, uh, well, I'm only on chapter 3. And he looks at me and he goes, "What the hell, Mark?" He goes, "I hired you and you need to understand why your business failed because you're going to be go out and doing analysis for these dental practices. And you got to understand why your business failed so you can help these other dentists understand." I'm like, and I didn't say anything because I was marrying his daughter in 3 months. And I'm like, just chill out. But then I read the book and I realized why my business failed. Then read the 7 Habits and then Richest Man in Babylon. The funny thing about the Richest Man in Babylon is the first thing he says in the book is you got to learn how to create value. It's not saving money first. It's because the more valuable you become, the more the marketplace rewards you, right?
Right.
So that was an interesting concept I never heard in college. And so then throughout the years, just 25 years, 30 years later, I flew a lot. So I was just reading books like crazy. Phones weren't a big deal, and so I was just reading like a madman. And so you wisdom, like Solomon. Solomon asked for wisdom. He didn't ask for riches. And
Yeah.
I always tell people wisdom is different than intelligence. Wisdom is going deep and learning about the wisdom of God, the Proverbs, and understanding. And you know books books are great, but you know it's hard to take a book and bring it to life in your life. So that's why coaches and mentors, which I really didn't understand in college and growing up. Like, why do I need a mentor or coach? And now, the power of mentors. When I've been blessed to have mentors like my dad growing up, very spiritual man, and you know, uh, Bill Bailey, Jim Rohn, my father-in-law, mentors. My wife's a mentor. People come into your life, and if you want a 10x or 100x, you need to search out that's what Jim Rohn said to me early. He said, Mark, you're going to be the same person you are today 5 years from now, except for the books you read, the courses you take, and the 5 people you hang around with. You better read books, take courses, and hang around 5 people who know a lot more than you. And that's why, like, on my team, the greatness team, I have dentists on my team. I got people that know a lot more than me, and I'm okay with that. I'm in
Yeah.
my lane, and I know my strengths, and but then you surround yourself, hopefully, and you just can't wait for a mentor to knock on the door. You got to go look for them. People kind of wait. Well, I hope I get a mentor. Well, no, you got to actually search them out. Ask if you can hang out with them for a day, or go to take them to lunch. And all that. It's
Well, when
yeah,
you think about that, right? And this is you're a great example of this. And I tell a lot of people, like, go ask the elite of the elite. Like, Bill Bailey at the time was a really big deal. He was like from nothing, and he built this
yeah.
massive company, and he was a massive deal. And all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, I'll stay at your house." And
I
then
know exactly.
here's a guy, like, you got young children, so you're just, you're probably about 30, right? And
Yeah,
he's
33.
like going, "Hey, you're mucking it up," and you're like, "Hey,
Yeah,
man, I gotta listen to this guy because
yeah,
he's accomplished a lot, and he's investing in me."
yeah,
And by the way, that relationship served Bill Bailey too. He's watching a young person go on and
yeah,
deliver a bunch of value, because you created value for thousands of people's lives, right? I mean,
yeah,
just probably hundreds of thousands when you think about it. Like, when we look about his coaching, we talk about, like, well, Mark helps this business that has 10 employees here at this dental office, and of course, the average family has 4. So you're impacting 40 people's lives, because
right.
they're all going to go home, and how they're going to interact with their kids and their spouses and all these significant things that happen. And people don't understand that ripple effect of this mentoring. And yet Bill Bailey, like, loves the fact that he could be with this young, energetic person, listens to the story, takes action, and is soaking up the information and the benefit of his experience and his knowledge of, like, hey, I've walked down a bunch of the right paths. Let me tell you when I walked down the wrong path, like, because that
Yeah,
wasn't great.
yeah,
And so what I love is, I've written this book, right? Leading winning teams. And man, it because, I had sent it over through a friend, and you got it. And I loved, you wrote me this great email, and you were like, hey man, I'm in on this thing, man. And I'm like halfway through, and I want to finish it. And I'm going on a flight tonight, and I'm knocking this thing out. And I was
yeah.
just like,
Actually,
dude,
it
I
was funny
love
because
that.
that's so funny because actually, a couple hours before I talked to you, and I said, "I got this book. You want to review it?" I was actually getting on a flight, and so I downloaded all the chapters, and I just took it with me on the plane, and so I was able to read it right away and connect with it. Like, one of the first things in your first chapter in your intro is you actually quote Jim Rohn. You don't put his name there because you kind of changed a few things, but you talk about the 2 pains: the pain of discipline and the pain of
Yeah.
regret. You choose. Jim Rohn says the same thing: the 2 pains, the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. And that's kind of starts the book off. And I read something. Uh, Denzel Washington said something about that. He's the pain of discipline, or you learn more through your pain than you do your joys.
Yeah.
And most people don't want to think about that. It's like, no, I don't want to have any pain. But it's just like we just had Easter, the Passion of the Christ. If you ever saw that
Well,
movie,
painful.
passion,
Yeah.
People think passion is this romantic thing, and it's no, that word passion, if you look it up, it means suffering. Like, passion, you're going to suffer the passion of the Christ. And that's an amazing. I tell people, my son just watched it with his girlfriend. She never saw it, and it's going to be crazy watching that movie. I mean, because this will never happen. When I was in Oregon and that movie came out, our church rented the movie theater. This will never happen, and got the rights to show that movie and have our congregation go watch it all the times with no previews, and then they got the permission to bring a worship band in before the movie, start playing worship songs, and then the movie you go right into the Garden of Gethsemane, and then at the end we gave out communion, and it was like this is happening in a movie theater.
Yeah.
And if you watch that movie, you're numb at the end of that movie.
Yeah.
And it was everybody's walking out, and I tell people you should YouTube and watch Jim Cazikio, who played Christ, talk about that movie, because what happened during that movie was incredible. The spiritual warfare. He got hit by lightning,
Yeah.
had two heart seizures on the cross when they filmed him. It was like some of the actors there said they saw people, and when they went back to the film, they weren't there, like white people in white outfits, and it was like they're not there in the filming. It's like a lot like spiritual warfare, like he talks about. It's like people don't think that that's going on. That's why we talked about earlier, the armor of God. People think, oh, the devil saying, no, we're battling every day. We're in a fight. We're in a battle, and you got to every day you wake up, you got to say, hey man, I'm in a battle. I got to put on the armor. I got to gear up. I'm going to get attacked by my family, my wife, my business, my work, my finances, my kids. I got to gear up and go into the battle, and then hopefully, ask for strength. Like I remember when I lost my business, owed everybody in my car. The quote that got me through it, I put in my car on the speedometer. It was from the book of Galatians, and it was, the quote is, "Do not grow weary in doing good, for in due season you will reap a harvest if you don't give up." And I was like, I kept reading that. I was like, keep doing good. Don't fall back. Try to do the best you can. In due season you'll reap a harvest. You just can't give up. You got to keep walking, man. You got to keep walking.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And I think a lot of the leadership that we read today, and I'm certainly writing the book to pass that on. You've written a book called Geronimo,
Yep.
and that's being passed on, right? Like, even whether it's a bestseller or whatever, like it doesn't matter. Like this is
Yeah.
this is
Exactly.
this is things that I put in that I've learned from lessons in my life, and also,
Yep.
and I want to pass those things on to other people because they're valuable, and it shows honor to the people who came alongside, like Bill and other
Yep.
people in your life. And it's such a tribute. And of course, your kids will have that forever. Like that's such a powerful thing to know more about dad than probably any kid. What kid wants to really know about their parents when they're 14? They're like, oh yeah, hey, I thought we'd sit around with you
Yeah.
guys Friday night and tell your stories about when you guys were kids. Or I want to go see my friends and go to the movies.
Yeah,
So
and I think like whatever, it doesn't matter. Like Jim Rohn said, Mark, set a goal to make $1 million, and I'm still working on that because I have kids in college and everything, and moved. When my house was almost paid off in Oregon, my wife wants to move back to Arizona. I'm like, I got to kick out another mortgage, and it's
yeah,
just like, but he said it's not about the $1 million, Mark. It's about what you have to give up, what you have to do, what you have to read, what you have to sacrifice. That's going to be more valuable than $1 million. And it's true. And I was, before this conversation, I had this in one of my books, and it kind of fell out. I knew I needed to share it, because it's like God says, let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches, but let the one who boast about this, that they have the understanding to know me. That's it, man. My kids aren't going to care if I have. I mean, maybe when I die, they're like, "Did Dad leave me anything?" But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
in the Bible, it says the greatest legacy you can leave your kids is not your money. Jim Rohn always said that. Hey, man, when you die, for God's sakes, don't leave your kids your TV or your 25, 30, 45, 60 inch. Leave them your books, your journals, your legacy. Leave them. Yeah, like the greatest legacy you can leave your kids is a spiritual path. I mean, a spirit, like not that beat them up about Christ or God or whatever your religion is. It's like they have a faith they can go to, and be able to stand the storms, because they're coming, man. The storms are coming, the rainbows are coming. They're
Right.
all so. How are you going to handle the storms when your wife leaves you? You know, your business goes bankrupt. You owe
Yeah.
everybody. You know, how are you going to handle it? And you know, the only
You,
peace that you can get is knowing that just keep walking.
when
You
you
know,
when you talk about that pain, man, I don't know anyone who's immune to that. Like
no,
I just
nobody's
don't know.
case.
Like there's no pain-free life. I mean, it's
Nope.
and the things you describe, whether it's mortgage or losing a parent that was close
Yeah.
to I mean, we're going through these hardships and it's funny. I remember thinking that, hey, money will solve all. And
Yeah.
like
We
if
all
you
think
if
that
you're
when you're young.
wealthy, it's not as if your children don't get sick. I mean, I remember when I first started down this path of just learning about faith and building this relationship. I thought like, man, people that were very faithful and righteous, they didn't have those issues. Like that was like it was like almost a layer of God's protection that if you were a faithful follower, your kids wouldn't get sick, and you'd never have to
No,
worry
no,
about.
that doesn't happen.
I thought like, wow, like, and when you
Yeah,
met
yeah,
people from all walks of life who were challenged, and you were realizing like, wow, no one's immune. And now the difference was, hey, we're going through the same things, but my friends over here, they've got all these tools in their tool belt and they're managing and navigating this pain and they're taking action and they're in fellowship with other people. And then
yeah,
I got this group over here who's like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And I've got no tools. And I'm
yeah,
like, oh, so what's your go-to? And they're like, well,
yeah,
alcohol always works temporarily. And like, and it's like, oh no,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah,
good,
yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
like
yeah.
so it's all of a sudden there's not these tools in the belt. And
Yeah.
so we default, right? We default to hey, let me just take the pain away in a short-term aspect.
Yeah, there's all
And
kinds of addictions. Exactly.
oh man, yeah, and that
Yeah.
just gets that cycle of regret going, right? Because now we're choosing the pain of
Yeah.
regret.
I mean,
And
I remember someone said, Mark, you don't have to be strong. You just have to be connected to what is. And that was Guy Finley. He's more of a new age kind of teacher, but I like that. You got to connect to what's strong. With me, it's connect to Christ, the Lord, God. And I remember this happened last week. I'm playing baseball with these older guys now on a team, and one of the guys is Jewish, and we became friends. And great guy, and so he saw that I wrote a book. He came to my house and he goes, I said, "You want a copy?" And he said, "Oh, I'd love it." And I said, "Oh, I just want to let you know there's going to be some stuff about Christianity." And he goes, "Oh, I'm okay with all that." And I go, "Well, if you haven't," I said, "if you have any questions, you can talk to me about it." And I bring him here. He starts laughing. He goes, "No, no, I'm Jewish." He goes, I don't believe in that stuff. I don't believe in heaven." I'm like, "Really?" I said, "You don't believe there's a heaven?" I said, he goes, "No, because there's different sects of Jewish,
yeah,
faith too." And he goes, "No, when you die, you're dying." I said, "Man," I said, "You don't think you go to heaven and there's no other place you're going to go?" And he goes, "Well, heaven's on earth." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you don't think, no, you're dead." I'm like, gosh, that's not a fun way to live." I said, "You don't think you're like, that's not really exciting to know that, I'm just going to die and that's it. But I said, "Wouldn't you rather just," and so I saw him today. We were practicing. He read the book and he went to Easter with some other guy on our team, and he had ham and celebrated Easter. And I said, "Oh, you're a believer now?" He's like, he goes, "No," but you just plant, like we're supposed to plant seeds, right?
yes,
We're not there to beat people up, and we're there to plant the seeds and give people inspiration and just tell people that, hey, man, I just know the only way I got through this life, my marriage, if it wasn't for the Lord, I wouldn't be married right now. I know that for a fact. My wife would say the same thing. And, but all you do is you can tell your story and plant the seeds and, you know, and, and, let God do the rest. And that's why, nobody really cares about how much money you have. Like I got on my license plate, I got GIG. That's my company, Growth and Greatness
yeah,
Institute. So people always, what does GIG stand for? You know what? I realized a long time ago, if I tell them Greatness Institute, Growth and Greatness, they're like, we're not going to care. So I remember a cop pulled me over one time. I was speeding in Oregon, like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was trying to get home, drive all the way to Medford, 4.5 hours. First thing he says, "Hey man, what's that GIG? What is that gig? What is that?" And I just looked. God is good. GIG. God is good. He goes, "Ha!" So I thought he'd go back to the car and let me off. He comes back 10 minutes later with the ticket. He goes, "I know God is good, but I still have to give you a ticket." Like that. I'm like, okay. So anyway,
I like
but
the accountability, right? So yeah, I think it's always insightful to get, folks that have been through it and where they find their grounding, right? One of the things that I find striking with the new age of business is there's a lot of uh, attention to the entrepreneur and oh man, start your own business, like this is
yeah.
just sexiness, man. And the way you described your 20s was the way my 20s were, right? And I was in professional baseball, got these businesses on the side, I'm mucking it up, and
Mhm.
I'm just like, man, and even now, there's nothing easy about business, and
Even if you've been in
I
it a
feel
long
like,
time, like this is my brother-in-law does what I do, and this quarter's been one of the slowest quarters in 25 years. And
yeah,
it's my brother-in-law's going through the same thing, and because everything's changing and trust and people, relationships, community, and but you just got to keep like Jim Rohn always said to me, Mark, you just got to show up. So I've been going to more meetings again, showing up at events, just and he says you just got to keep showing up. And that's what you got to do. You can't hide in your office and everybody knows that, but you got to like tomorrow I'm going out to visit two people and one of them doesn't even know I'm coming. You just got to keep showing up. And most people, the fear stops them or no, you just and I'm not people think, oh, you wrote a book, you speak, you're an extrovert. Not no, I'm actually an introvert because I like my alone time, like taking hikes by myself. I can go to a movie by myself. I like just quiet time, and but you have to force yourself to go out, and when you do, you meet other people. Good things happen. There's a lot of good out there. People think there's all the crap on TV. Yeah, a lot of crap's going on, and people. But you know what? We're still here to make a difference, right? You are here to be a difference maker. I think you say a way maker in your book.
yeah,
You take dreams and help a person become a dream maker. And I think that I love that. I wrote that down. That's kind of cool. And but yeah, it's funny about the entrepreneur because I was at a Foot Locker a couple months ago, and the guy giving me shoes was like, "Hey, what do you do?" And I told instead of telling him I'm a dental consultant or I run my own company, work with dentists. It's like, okay, dentist, I hate going to that. I
yeah,
said to so this is what I said to him. I said, you know what? I help people become entrepreneurs. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, really?" He goes, "I want to be like you just said, I want to be an entrepreneur. You help me." And he tells me what he's thinking about doing. I'm like, "Well, I don't think I can help you in that specific area." He's like, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, but it's like, do you realize it's like you're going to pay a huge price. And an entrepreneur sleeps, dreams, thinks, wakes up in the morning, in the middle of the night. Everything you're thinking about about your business is like nonstop. And I really like in Oregon when I pulled into my garage, I purposely made this cloth thing with my two kids and my wife, and I looked at it and said, "Okay, Mark, shut it down, man. Walk into the house, shut her down, because my daughter always like, let's go on the tramp, and or maybe you just want to watch a game and have a beer." And like I read something my father-in-law gave me called the period of destiny, and it's in my book Geronimo, the chart about the period of destiny. Every 24 hours you have 2 to 3 hours your period of destiny every day. And what are you going to do with that period of destiny? Read, you can take a walk with your wife, you can jump on a trampoline with your kids, or you can sit there and watch a game. I'm not saying don't watch a baseball game or football, but if you work on your period of destiny every day for 5, 10 years, you're gonna something's gonna happen. And I
mm,
had my period of destiny when my kids were that young were like, no, I'm gonna jump on the tramp for 30, 45 minutes with my daughter, because she'll remember that. She does. Like she's 26 now. She remembers me jumping on the tramp with her. and like that's those are the things that you gotta, those shifts. Like just having that word period of destiny. I tell people you got to work on your period of destiny. They're like, what do you mean? And I tell them about it. And they're like, oh, I'm like, okay, that I'm gonna start thinking about that. And yeah, what are you doing with your wife? Like same old routine. I get into it too, but like work on your period of destiny with your wife. Go take a walk after dinner. I know you
Yeah.
maybe don't want to, but go take a 30-minute walk and just walk with her. Don't try to fix her like me. I told you that line that changed my relationship with my wife after 30 years. It was a book called Love Does by Bob Goff. I've long stopped trying to fix people. I just want to be with them now. And that's the same thing with leadership. You're trying to fix your team, fix your manager. No, just try to be with them, mentor them, coach them, grow them. In our work, when we work with a dental team, we give them books to read, and we know they're not going to read the book. So I say, look, buy one book, and then each week, one of your team members reads one chapter. That's it. And then they go debrief the team for 5 minutes on what they learned in that chapter. And then the next person reads it. And then you have community learning, community ideas, community involvement, community, their voices get heard, and everybody starts learning. You got to develop a culture of learning. You could talk about it, lifelong learning. I call it L3. I have it in my model. It's lifelong learning. And how do you create that culture with your people? Like, how do you help them become learners for life? Because it doesn't stop when you turn 25 or graduate from college.
Yeah.
Like like you quote John Wooden. I love John Wooden. I have all his stuff, his tapes, his books. You're quoting with John Wooden is proper preparation prevents poor performance.
Yeah. Five
Proper,
piece.
yeah. And so I read your book, buddy. So I read your
Yeah, man. You're like, yeah,
and
you knocked it out, man. You got
and
it.
but my
Mark it.
favorite quote is, and I have it on my email, is from John Wooden. Is it's what you learn after you know it all that counts.
Yeah.
And that's a very humbling quote. We talked about that early, humility before honor, before the call. And it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. And I used to tell that to my son all the time growing up. He hated that quote because he was a basketball player. And he'd come to me like at 15 or 16, like, Dad, I already know it all. I say, remember John Wood, buddy? It's what you learn after you know it all. He's like, don't tell me that anymore. No, I hate that quote.
Yeah.
But the other quote, John Wood, was like, make each day a masterpiece. I love
Yeah.
that. Like, even the worst thing, like one of your chapters in your book, you talk about gratitude.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to a seminar about 2 years ago, and a dentist was there, 77. He's still going to these meetings. I'm like, you're retired. Why are you still going to these lectures? He goes, I just love learning. And he goes, as a matter of fact, Mark, he goes, a year ago, I heard the best lecture of my life. And he goes, I started implementing it. I wish I would have learned this 25, 30. My life would have been totally different. I would have been so much more happier. And I'm like, well, what was it? And he goes, the lecture wrote the word big on the board. I'm like, oh, this is going to be about goals and big, hairy, audacious goals, like Good to Great, Jim Collins.
Yeah.
And he's got great stuff. But he said, no, he goes big. He wrote big, and he said, begin in gratitude. He said, every morning, begin in gratitude, whether it's 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 minutes, just just pause and say, what am I grateful for? I got two hands and okay, whatever. And then he said, and then he said he wrote EIG, or no, he said he wrote CIG. And he said from 6 a.m. to noon, some shit's going to happen. Your daughter's going to call you smoking pot. She's been in school, whatever, whatever happens, your wife. And he said, so at noon, you're going to have to pause again, continue in gratitude, just
Mm.
pause again. And then he wrote EIG, and he said, when you lay down at night, he just, no matter how crappy of a day or great of a day, whatever happened, you just lay down and you thank God, or you just say, hey man, just thankful I just got through this day again. Just glad my wife's still sleeping next to me. My kids are okay. Just end in gratitude. And he said, Mark, that I've been doing that the last 3 to 6 months, whatever. He said, my life is totally different now. And
Mm.
I never forget that, because I started trying to do that. I don't do it perfectly every day, but I know like when I end in gratitude at night, if I remember to just for even if for like 20, 30, I sleep so much better.
Mm.
It's amazing the mind and just how you set your mind and your mindset is so powerful. And so I tell people that story all the time now. I said, if you could just practice, if you just do this in your life, and that's all I tell you to do, and that's the only secret I give you, your life will change.
Well, let's end, Mark, with this. One of the things that we take on in this business is um, there's a lot. There's a lot of responsibility for a leader. There's a lot of
Yep.
responsibility and one of the ways that people really got themselves into that position was by being resolute, being determined, competitive, and
Yeah.
I think you see that that those taglines in the sports world, like no fear, never surrender.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's like
Oh
and
yeah.
the new
Yeah.
book, you're a badass, right? Like, and
Oh
I
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then now, but there's this time that comes into a leader's life, and I call it the S word, right? And man, it's this submit and surrender. There's a
Oh yeah.
time in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
life
Yeah.
that leaders need to submit and surrender, and then I think it's part of the humility, right? I think it's part of that I'm not always in charge. We
Yep.
are in this together, and that I got to come alongside,
Yep.
and what, celebrating in everyone winning as just me winning is so much better,
Yeah.
and I see a lot of people that struggle with that, right?
Hmm.
Because I think I told you, like, when I tell some of the best leaders in the world, like, hey man, you just need to surrender this one, and they're like, they hear the word, and there's like a
Yeah.
visceral reaction, right? It's like
Oh
edge of
yeah.
your seat, like the fist clench, and it's like, oh really? Like, you think I'm gonna surrender on? Hey man, like, you want to put the gloves
Yeah.
on? Like, it's like, hey man,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get in a fight here, but it creates a reaction amongst us.
Yeah.
And man, I think it's one of those things. We see it in addiction, we see it in all sorts of places, that until you get to that position in your life and
Right.
realize it's not all about you and it's going to take more than just you,
Yeah.
um, it's a tough one to overcome.
Yeah. Surrender. And we talked about this before the call. There's a quote from William Booth, who started the Salvation Army, and he was very deep man of faith. And his quote was, "The greatness of a man's power is the measure of his surrender." And if you talk to men, because I've been in men's groups for 30 years, we're just naturally we don't want to surrender. That like if you surrender, oh, you're weak. No, like God said, in your weakness is your strength, but that's the power of surrendering. Like Booth says, uh, you know, you just don't understand it until like even in AA, because some of my family members, have been in AA and recovering, and um, if in AA, you surrender to a higher power, God, and that's what gets you to find some other strength so you can draw on that. Like that quote I mentioned to you before this was, you don't have to be strong, you just need to be connected to what is strong. So I'm not going to be shy. I'm connected to God, to Christ Jesus. That's my connection. That's where I get my strength and power. People say, "Oh, you got to connect to God. That's a sign of no." A foolish person is going to be just thinking, I can handle all this, and and I know you got to go. I'll end it, but I didn't really talk about Bill Bailey, but Bill Bailey, there's Jeremy Allen,
Yeah,
there's Bill
my man,
Bailey,
Jeremy Allen.
yeah,
Yeah,
my wife Christy, and then my partner Deb for 25 years. And so Bill Bailey, you said in the beginning, I didn't say anything. Even though he helped me out tremendously, when I met him, he wasn't lecturing, he wasn't doing anything, and I got him on a lecture circuit. He started speaking about his life growing up with 13 kids, starting a $70 million. He wrote a book called Rhythms of Life. He had all these poems in his head that he started sharing with me, and I'm like, how do you remember all these poems. And he goes, it just appeared to me, Mark. I'm like, you got to write these down. I'm like, he goes, well, he goes, I said, if you died, no one's going to know these poems. And one of them is called the Warrior Song. And he said he was on top of a mountain one day because he hiked a lot. And he looked down, there was this big lake. He woke up and he said these words just came to him. And he just said, I called it the Warrior Song. And the words just came out. And he shared the poem with me. And I'm like, oh my. And he goes, I don't question the source. I know where it came from. And so I carry this poem with me too. And it's called the Warrior Song. And Jeremy knows about it, but it goes like this. He said, the sun kisses a mountain top and glistens on its face of snow and slowly climbs in the sky above and lights the valley below. For each of us, this day awakes, a miracle takes place. For once again, we walk our earth and own all upon its face. And the past regrets and foolish fears of yesterday's cloudy mind are washed away by the light of day and seem so far behind. For each of us is reborn each day. Our life renews again, and with the help of God, we will find a cause that makes us want to win. For a man or woman without a goal in life is a man already dead. His mind wanders from place to place, and he walks with feet of lead. He has no reason to stretch his mind, no spirit to stir his soul. His name is not even in the book when destiny calls the roll. Better to take the wine of life and drink both deep and long. Greet each day because you're here to stay and sing your warrior song. For the battle of life is joined and you must fight long and true. For in this strife, the game of your life and the only loser is you. Gird up your loins with courage and answer the trumpet's call. And lose or win, you can say at the end, this was the greatest of all.
Love it.
And
Love
that,
it. Like I'm telling you, that's a real gift, man. And I'm telling you, some of these guys in that era, Wooden, big spiritual guy, and read all these poems, and his players wrote him poems. I love it. I want to finish rap with this great words of finish, Mark. Thank you so much for everybody out there who's going through some things. Like, this is the Warrior Song's real. Like, it's there for you. And man, it's incredible that these people are sharing their wisdom with you. And I think when I really think deep about that I believe in my heart of hearts that God has led women to lean and lead in submission. They submit, and God calls them to submit first. And for all of us who are in relationship, often we realize that our significant, our spouse, is a mirror of our relation to God. And so for all the women out there who think submission is a horrible thing, I would tell you that you're probably modeling the best way a man is ever going to surrender and submit in his life. And they saw you do it in your strength and your power. They're grateful and thankful for it because they know the leadership and making the decisions is actually the easy part. The followers coming along is the hard part. So people submitting to that concept is a really big deal. And it's a faith and a confidence that you have in someone else, and you show that. And so when you show that to a man in your life, then that gives him the courage to submit to other people and surrender in other instances. He knows that's right, because I've seen the strength from my wife, and I've seen what it looks like, and she models that for me, because I know I'm called to do it, but I don't know what it looks like until you show me. And I think it's what we're called.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, people don't like that word, and I just tell people, like, there's a book called Love and Respect, and
Yeah,
most
great book.
women can love way better than men can love. But Love and Respect, when I read that book, our marriage was going through a lot of hard things, and I remember reading the first chapter of that book, and he talks about, men want respect, and and I was thinking, reading that first chapter and thinking, yeah, man, my wife respected me, our marriage would be a lot better, man. And I'm like, she needs to read this freaking book, man. So I remember going on a trip, and I'm like, honey, I know we're going through a hard time right now. This book, I think, can help our marriage, but I was thinking more about me. And it's just like, can you read a couple of chapters we could talk about when I get back? And I remember giving her the book, and I got home from the trip. I said, hey, what'd you think of the book? And like, well, I haven't read it yet. I've too many kids and everything. I'm like, oh man. And then I remember, and then the following week, and I'll end it here. That following week, I think, okay, I'm going to take the book, put it next to the bed, and I placed it where I knew if she moved it like even a centimeter, I knew she picked it up. So I remember going on the trip again. I asked her, could you read it? We could talk about it. Get home. First thing I do is go in the bedroom. I look, the book, nothing, not one. I knew she, and then I remember it was like a God thing. I remember walking away thinking, God, man. And I remember the voice, I'm not saying it, but I was just like, Mark, that book is for you, not you read it and just
Yeah.
do what it says, and then I'll take care of the rest, buddy. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you start loving her better. You start loving her deeper. You start complimenting her more. You start going back to you did when you were dating her. You start remember second innocence. You start saying, she's not the same. You're not the same. And I was like, okay. And she never read the book. It's like it's on my shelf.
Took the fixer hat
But,
off. But hey, she
know,
did get the fixer part, right? Like I think,
but I
that
think,
confession, right?
I think surrendering, that's the only way that's going to keep your marriage going. If you keep surrendering to each other, both of you. And, that's the beauty of it. Because I remember my pastor in Oregon said, hey, why don't you talk to some people that have been married 30, 40, 50, 60 years? Ask them how they able to stay together. And he
Yeah.
goes, you'll learn so much because all of them thought about walking away a dozen times, 20 times, 30 times, and say, what kept, and they always, we started doing that, my wife and I, and all of them said the same thing. Oh, we wanted to leave each other. We stuck it out. I'm not saying stay in an abusive relationship or anything, but the ones that also, they said, we're so glad we stuck it out, went through the storms, and now we're so much stronger. And
Shaped.
that really, the warrior song, start each day, renew each day, have your goals, drink deep, take time to laugh, live, love, do all the stuff. And
I love the
yeah.
gratitude. I love the big sig and ig. Like I think it's I like the 3 check-ins like on it. I think it's really, really important for
Yeah.
people to understand. It's a great way to check in and ground because no matter how hard look into horrible things in our lives and go, oh, with all this gratitude, I feel horrible. Like we just don't do it.
Yeah.
Sun winners find a way.
Yeah.
I'm thrilled that
People
everyone
want to
could
be
be
happy.
here.
People want to
Mark
be happy.
Battiato,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here.
All right, buddy. Hopefully I'll see you in Arizona soon. You got my number. I'll give you a copy of the Warrior song.
You bet. We'll yeah. Hey, listen, I'm gonna pull a bill. I'm gonna call you up and go, listen, I'm coming for 5 days. I'm moving in. I'm gonna stay.
Hey, the rooms are empty. My daughter and son are left. The guest room's open. All right, man. Good talking to you, John. Take care.
Perfect.